In this episode, drum roll please, we're going to be talking about the tools. These are the things that you need to whip up and mix your cake. Now, first of all, let me say this. You actually do not need so many tools to get started. Yes, you might see on Instagram or YouTube, they seem to have lots of baking pans, lots of equipment, lots of stuff, and that actually may put some people off from getting started with baking. No, 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 no. You actually do not need so many of those stuff, and we're going to break it down. First of all, I'm going to talk to you about the essential tools that every baker should have. So if you're new to baking, you'll know exactly what to get. If you started baking and you've got some stuff already, you'll be able to work out what bits of kit is missing so that you can get them and add them to your stash. And these are, we're going to put this in the group one, these are the essential, the sort of need to have tools. And I'm not just going to talk you through all the tools, no, because that's a bit boring and that doesn't really help you as much. No, we're going to talk about the tools and you're going to actually see me using these tools in baking. So you'll be able to visualize exactly why these tools are essential. Once we have covered the essential tools, we're going to go on to tools that are nice to have and will make your baking easier if you have them. Some of them are not expensive, some of them are a little bit costly, so then it's really up to you to decide if it's worth getting. As a newbie beginner, as a newbie baker, definitely stick to the essentials, and then as you progress and as you grow to love baking, which I'm sure you will, then you can add those tools. And literally by the end of this video, you will know what tools you need to get, how to use them, why they're important, and you'll be well on your way to baking success. And don't forget to watch all the other videos of this series because they're packed full of knowledge that will transform your baking journey. And make sure that you subscribe to this channel so that as soon as I post more of the series, you will be notified. So subscribe and tick the notification button so you don't miss anything in this series and so that you don't miss anything in this series. And also I have nearly 500 videos on baking and cake decorating that will help transform you from I don't know how to bake or decorate a cake to look at this beautiful stunning cake I baked and decorated. So subscribe today.
Perhaps one of the most essential tools that you need is a weighing scale. You're going to be using this to weigh most of your ingredients like your butter, your flour, your sugar, icing sugar, things like that. So it's absolutely essential to have a weighing scale so you can measure your ingredients properly. You also need measuring spoons. You're going to be using this to measure your ingredients that you use in smaller quantities. Ingredients such as your baking powder, bicarbonate of soda, and also liquids like your food flavoring or things like vinegar or milk, anything that you measure in small quantities like in teaspoons and tablespoons, you're going to use a measuring spoon for that, and they come in different sizes: teaspoons, tablespoons. These are not expensive to have and are absolutely essential. When you want to weigh larger quantities of liquids, such as when you are weighing things like cream or milk or oil, you will need what we call measuring jugs. Measuring jugs will measure in millimeters, some will measure in ounces, some will measure in cups. You don't need to have a large measuring jug, but it's useful to have a measuring jug that will measure in the different measurements so that you can use them depending on what measurement is used in your recipe. So measuring jugs are essential tools. You're going to need bowls. You're going to need bowls different sizes and probably at least two. You'll use that for mixing just about everything, mixing your dry ingredients, mixing your cake batter, mixing your sugar butter, mixing everything on the sun. So get yourself mixing bowls, and they could be plastic or they could be glass, it doesn't really matter, but you need big enough mixing bowls for mixing your stuff. A spatula is essential. You use this in so many ways. It's a multi-purpose tool. You use it in mixing all your ingredients together, whether that is mixing by hand or mixing partially with your mixer and by hand. You use that to mix all your dry ingredients together. When you are creaming your butter or making your batter, you'll also use a spatula to scrape down the bowl. I use it to put buttercream into a piping bag. I use it when I am mixing and scraping down the bowl during the mixing process. Some mixing processes, like when we talk about folding your batter into each other, again, you'll use a spatula. So, if I can say one tool that is so multi-purpose is a spatula. Like now that I'm making this video, I can now see just how functional and multi-purpose a spatula is, and they're pretty inexpensive. Buy two. You'll need it. You'll need a whisk to whisk things together, whether that is when you are mixing your cake batter by hand, or there are certain cake recipes where actually whisking is a big part of it. So in this cake recipe, for example, for my chocolate cake, I do most of the mixing with a cake whisk. It's a recipe that you don't actually need a mixer at all. So you use a whisk to whisk up your ingredients together. You can just use a standard whisk that you probably already have in your kitchen, but a good whisk is essential tool that every beginner baker should have. So make sure that you get yourself a whisk. Now, once you've made your cake batter, of course, you're going to need a cake tin. And the question is, how many cake tins do you need? Like, this is a selection of my cake tins. No, you don't need these many cake tins. To start off with, you probably need just two sizes, and usually most people start off with round cake tins. So I recommend you get a 8-inch like the one beforehand, and a smaller one like a 6-inch, and that is more than enough to start off with. Now, cake tins come in various materials. I would recommend you get the ones like you see here. A lighter colored cake tin bakes more evenly and is easier to use. So get one like this, or just get any cake tin, you'll need it. You're going to need a hand mixer. Yes, you can manage without a hand mixer, but it makes life a lot easier when you at least have a hand mixer for mixing your cake batter together. For cake batters that call for creaming, you'll use a whisk for that. You'll use a whisk to mix your batter, and you'll also use a whisk when you're making things like buttercream. So get a hand mixer, is probably an essential tool. A wire rack is another tool that is essential, but lots of people don't mention it often enough. This is what you use to cool your cakes off to prevent your cakes from going soggy. So if you don't have a wire rack and you cool your cakes, say on a plate, it will actually affect the texture. So make sure you get a wire rack so that you can cool your cakes properly on a wire rack. And I think these are the absolute essential tools that every beginner baker needs. Let's talk about tools that are useful to have but not absolutely essential. A sieve is probably useful to have and it's not expensive, so I recommend that you get one. There's certain times when you need to sieve your flour or when you're using ingredients like cocoa powder, it's a good idea to sieve them. So get a sieve. A stand mixer would make life a lot easier as you bake, but it does require a big outlay because it is expensive. So, yes, it comes into its own when you're making things like meringue based buttercream or whipping up your icing or just for general cake baking purposes. A stand mixer makes it a lot easier. And for things like making bread and dough, it makes life so much easier. So it does make things easier, but I appreciate it's expensive and you may only feel that it's worth getting later on in your baking journey. And last but not the least is a straight palette knife. I use this all the time to loosen the edges of my cake in the cake tin so that when I flip it out, it comes out nice and clean. And you'll find other general uses for a palette knife. So I would say it's worthwhile getting it, and it's not pretty expensive, and it's a useful tool. So that brings me to the end of this video where I've shown you the essential tools that every beginner bakers need. So if you have a tool that's missing in your stash, then go and get it. And don't forget to watch other videos in this Back to Baking Basics series. Till next time I see you, happy baking. Don't forget to subscribe. Goodbye.